Hi, everybody. I just heard the sad news that Jeff Labar, a guitar player from Cinderella, has passed away at the age of 58. And so I thought I would make a video as a tribute to him talking about Cinderella. I've mentioned in other videos that I'm of the age that when I was in high school, MTV had just come out. So I was really into a lot of those hard rock metal bands that were on MTV at that time, like Dawkins, Rat, early Motley Crue, stuff like that. And one of my favorite bands from that era was always Cinderella. And although they get lumped into sort of the glam thing, and I really think it's just because of the name of the band and their look on the first album, the cover here, uh, and they get mentioned. You'll hear them talked about like next to like bands like Poison and stuff. For me, they were always a cut above groups like Poison and a lot of the bands that were coming out sort of towards the later part of the 80s. Like their first album, I believe, came out in 1986. So they were sort of a few years after that first wave of LA stuff, like the early Quiet Riot and Rat and stuff like that. And for me, what made Cinderella really stand out above everybody else was their sound. For me, they were coming more from, instead of coming from the glam sound of like Poison and Hanoi Rocks and groups like that that were maybe more influenced by the New York Dolls or some of the punk type stuff, or T-Rex or the Sweets. For me, Cinderella was really coming from a 70s blues, hard rock, Rolling Stones-ish, Small Faces, Humble Pie, like that kind of sound. And I just always thought it was great. I was a big fan of AC/DC. They reminded me a little bit, especially on their first album, of AC/DC. Tom Kiefer kind of has a Brian Johnson-ish gravel to his voice, but to me, he always had more of, again, like a 70s, more like a Rod Stewart-ish, bluesy, whiskey-soaked thing to his voice. I always thought the songwriting was great. And I just dug their 70s sound, that blues sound that they seem to have, sort of brought into like the 80s. And the other thing is the guitar playing. I always felt the guitar playing was really great. Jeff's playing was very blues influenced. And at this time, 86, and when their other albums came out, everybody was just shredding and playing really fast, it seemed. It was like who could play the fastest, and they came out and they sort of, again, took it more from the 70s kind of thing, blues based, more melodic and sort of soulful type of playing. So it was something that I always really loved about them, and I always felt bad and that they got lumped into that whole LA glam hair metal thing. Because again, for me, their music was a lot better than a lot of those bands that were coming out in the mid and late 80s. And if you see here on the back of the Long Cold Winter album, they sort of already started changing their look. And but unfortunately, I don't know if just the band name and the first album here, you can see them on the back of the first album. It's very sort of glammed out. That image just sort of stuck with them, which I think is unfortunate. I think that for me, I might say that I like them better than Guns N' Roses. Guns N' Roses was a band that came out and brought even more of that kind of Aerosmith 70s vibe, but I think the songwriting is actually a little bit better with Cinderella than it was with Guns N' Roses, and I kind of like the more stripped down nature of Cinderella, where Guns N' Roses, with their Use Your Illusion albums, that got a bit too much for me. They seem to go in the opposite direction, like when they went like Long Cold Winter and Heartbreak Station. They seem to take it back more in like an acoustic, bluesy, soulful kind of thing. So these albums, there's just a lot of great stuff on here. I mean, you've got here on Night Songs, the title track. I love that. It's got a heavy like groove to it. Let me put my glasses on here so I don't miss anything. Shake Me is that's a real AC/DC type of vibe to it. Nobody's Fool. I always thought that Cinderella, I always loved their ballads. I loved Tom Kiefer's voice, and I just think that they're just really well-written songs. Nothing for Nothing, Hell on Wheels, Somebody Save Me. That's another one that's kind of like got an AC/DC vibe to it. Back Home Again is cool. I probably like a little bit better Long Cold Winter, because for me, this is where I think here they were still trying to, fit into that whole like 80s LA sound, even though, I should also mention that Cinderella is from like the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, and me being originally from Philadelphia, I guess I always had a warm spot for them, sort of local heroes. But I think on Long Cold Winter, they really started moving more into their blues direction. And this album, I just love this. Bad Seamstress Blues, Falling Apart at the Seams. I love Gypsy Road. That was a real popular one. Huge chorus. Here's another fantastic ballad, Don't Know What You Got Till It's Gone. I always loved The Last Mile. Again, super catchy song, Second Wind. I always thought that had a cool, like, driving groove to it. And the guitar sounds, I mentioned Jeff's playing and the guitar playing on these being super soulful, and they had a great guitar sound too. At this era, when people were starting to have these sort of oversaturated, lots of effects on the guitars, they had a really stripped back AC/DC style, just kind of loud, more Gibson and Marshall type of sound, which always appealed to me. I always dug that. The title track on this is great, Long Cold Winter. Coming Home, I always loved that. Take Me Back. Heartbreak Station, there's a lot of great ones on here. The More Things Change, Shelter Me is great. The title track is great. So just more, and again, they just kept going more in like a rootsy, bluesy type direction. There was one more album after this, Still Climbing, that I'm not as familiar with. I don't have that one. I have heard it, but for me, these first three, especially Long Cold Winter and Heartbreak Station, I really, really dig. I just dig the rootsy, bluesy vibe that they get on these, while still, have a kind of a cool AC/DC groove, hard rock to their sound. So, all right. So a quick little video as a tribute to Jeff Labar, who sadly just passed away. So Jeff Labar, rest in peace.